This is the Situation Room. Wherever you're tuned in across, it is Joe and Ndu with you in the Situation Room. We get into our final conversation this hour, and we're looking at a number of things where we look at conversations concerning issues around development and its the different tenets that we use to then confirm so. The Office of Economic Development, who we're talking with this morning, and this morning we speak with our guest who's already in the hot seat of the Situation Room. Dr. Downlaod is the Director of Planning and Policy Research at the CAK, which is the Competition Authority of Kenya, and joins us in the hot seat this morning. Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Karibu sana. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to be looking at a number of issues today, so we're glad that you're with us. As we normally do, we're going to start the program today with a proverb which comes from South Africa. We go around the African continent every week. We come from a different country, and we come back with their proverbs. So today, we are in South Africa. This week, we're in South Africa, and we'd love to get your interpretation of this proverb. The proverb is, the wind does not break a tree that can bend. The wind does not break a tree that can bend. What do you make of that?
What I can make of that is that a tree that's not bend means you can institute measures to improve structures or systems, but not to overhaul or kill it.
Okay.
That's my interpretation of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And as we get into this interesting interpretation, as we get into this conversation this morning, of course, we want to understand a little bit. Office of Economic Development. What is this office, and what does it do?
OECD, as it's normally called, Office of Economic Development and Economic Cooperation and Development of EU. They have many mandates within the European Union. It's one of the offices within the EU, and they look at economic and development issues within the cooperation of European Union, and in particular the one that reviewed the competition framework was more concerned with the competition issues and within the European Union. There's a bigger umbrella within, as you know, European Union, that there are different segments or components that look at different issues within European Union. And this particular office that reviewed our process was looking at what are competition issues meant for economic cooperation, because competition itself as tenet of economics and therefore development. How can economy contribute to development in that perspective? So this particular office was looking at how can economic cooperation contribute to development. And they're the ones who reviewed our framework, looking at it, how can competition framework as it is now contribute to economic development for Kenya, and what are some of the improvement that might be required based on the current structure that will contribute to our economic development.
So it would appear there is a healthy competition and unhealthy competition, in a manner of speaking. And then as you look at this what they call the financial sector deepening access to capital, regulation on cannibalizing of brands and all that. They are all meant to spur some competition in a way, because again, profitability primarily is driven by you being able to compete against your opponent.
Right.
But the business environment has to be set in a way that it allows for all to thrive, for all to come up and venture into the market and assume some certain percentage of the market share. That is what you opt to regulate in a manner such that we are able to spur our economy. But today, vis-a-vis the European Union umbrella, locally, what is our position in terms of the CAK? What measures are we trying to look into in terms of trying to regulate that space, or even just to monitor the emerging patterns? Where are we as a country?
Yeah, thank you very much. That question sits at the core of what we do. Our main mandate is to promote competition, as well as we have another mandate of looking at consumer issues, which is not the main focus of even the review, but promoting competition, as you correctly say. there has to be some inherent benefits that competition must bring. And that competition has to be fair to all the players, depending on which sectors we are looking into. One of the things that we do is to monitor market and see for any given market, there is fair play. And if there is new entrant or small company merging at any given time, there's no limitation for them to enter that market, barrier to entry, as we call it. So in this context, the way we want to do is that the more the competition, as to correctly put it, there has to be margin for the player themselves, the business entities. But when the competition is very stiff, then there has to be more competition, more innovation, more efficiency within a firm for them to make that profit. And the benefit driven from, therefore, consumers, where we are all consumers, therefore, is to get better prices. So that within a given market segment, where we have more competition and more efficiencies, we are likely to benefit in that market. And more broadly, if we look at collectively then as a market, as a Kenyan economy, looking at all sectors of the economy, if competition prevails in all sectors, collectively, we should be able to see greater contribution to our economic growth and development. Yeah.
Okay. So what's the, just looking at, what are the main, so there's a report obviously that's come out most recently, looking at the processes that you institute for competition in the country, that there is a desire then for them to be competition between brands and or services in the country. So you've come up with a report most recently as this office. Tell us, what are some of the findings of this report and why is it important?
There are a number of findings based on the peer review process. This was voluntary. We are the ones who asked to be reviewed, our system to be assessed, and also independent. They looked at our operations and our activities and seen what are some of the things that we are doing and achieved in that process since the enactment of Competition Act in 2010. There are a number of findings. One is that the Kenyan competition law is comprehensive and also measures to the standards of other jurisdictions where competition exists. Some of the measures, therefore, is to do with some of our work that we do, like merger analysis. If parties would like to merge or acquire other parties, then there has to be vigorous analysis. And OECD finding is that the thresholds that are put for that merger analysis, there are certain thresholds within which some mergers are analyzed, others are just notified without any, and based on the capital. So those thresholds and procedures are well in place, according to the finding. In addition, the authority has done a number of market studies for it to inform its enforcement actions, where we see evidence provided by studies should contribute to policy moving forward. So they have seen that there are a number of studies we have done that has informed policy that can contribute to economic growth. The other aspect that they have established, the authority has been doing, is that we have had cooperation framework. Maybe at this point I should state that the Competition Authority has a national mandate in terms of market regulation. And we do recognize there are also sector regulators, specific sectors.
Does the market regulation include pricing?
It does not include price control. But in terms of enforcement and investigations, we do look at price as a parameter that will enable us assess whether they're actually fair play or some big companies are setting prices or fixing prices to undermine effort of smaller companies. So price per se is not an issue because we are in a liberals market and therefore price control is not an issue. But in terms of how market plays out and the basis of profit that companies are motivated to be in business, of course, is the price and the margins thereof. So in that sense, price is a very important parameter from an economic perspective for market to be motivated for players to go into that market.
So what are some of the factors then that affect competition amongst products and services in country?
There are two aspects that are very important. One is market structure. Within a given market segment, how many players are in that market? The more the players, the more likely to be more competition. The fewer the players, then you tend towards monopoly situation. So this is not a situation for us, but we are in a competitive environment. The other aspect to support this process is merger now. When we are looking at merger analysis, we are looking at how do these mergers, acquisition of one company by another, affect competition post that merger. That is the main analysis for our merger. Therefore, we look at what will market look like in anticipation, how will it look like post-merger. So that's how we look at competition then, that we can also follow up on those decisions thereafter and see how did it play out, what we anticipate play out in that market.
Well, are there instances in the country or otherwise where acquisition has been stopped vis-a-vis a prediction that if this merger was to prevail, then the market will collapse or the consumer will be unfairly facing either monopoly or there'll be an imbalance in the market? Are there instances where acquisition has been stopped?
In our case, no. Because companies that come to us, they have done their analysis, they have seen the situation requires for them to merge, to grow their market. And therefore, we have not declined on any or prohibited any merger based on analysis, because merger analysis is on case-by-case basis. For the sectors that we have rolled on, in this case, we have not declined or prohibited any merger. But that's on condition that the analysis itself, as far as the composition law is concerned, is in agreement with the analysis and therefore post-merger. But there are certain instances where merger can be looked into in terms of how a company is collapsing so that we rescue that company. When it's acquired, then it's a called failing firm. Therefore, you actually bring that company into life. So there are also instances like that where instead of them collapsing and harming our economy, even in terms of employment, job creation, then they actually become more vibrant in the market again.
Well, sometimes competition is healthy. And we argue that the more you're able to compete in the market, perhaps the more you develop, your edge as a company and increase profit and all that. But now, when you step in as an authority that seeks to not necessarily regulate that, but monitor how that is playing out, some people may argue, interference. Again, we are a capitalistic environment. The more I'm able to make, the more I'm able to control in terms of market, ought to be encouraged. So how do you balance the two between being termed as interfering with the capitalistic nature of our operation and providing fair play, more so in the consumer in mind as well?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question in terms of what we do. I think it's good to look at how we analyze our cases and the process it takes for it to be passed on decision post that analysis. So one is to look at our internal operations and how we get or identify these firms. I have just explained about merger and how we regulate market structure. The other side is market conduct. The way we look at market conduct is who are the players in this market, and now what is their behavior, what is their conduct in terms of relative to other players. So there are instances where companies, because of stiff competition, find the going tough. The bottom line is not working for them. Therefore, they find a way of working together to see that they can restrict, for example, imports of raw material required for producing a given commodity. In such instance, they come together and canvas and see how best can we work together. Restrict imports, suppress production, and therefore increase consumer prices in the long run. So if that happens, this is based on analysis, and therefore evidence will show whether what we have done is something that we are killing the market or we are promoting market. So in this case, then we do analysis, and if there's no case based on our initial intelligence gathering that there's no competition which is harmful now in the market, then we have no decision to make. But then when we find evidence, we go in and make a decision on that and penalize companies. The other thing, the way we look at is our own internal mechanisms of how we make our own decisions, that it goes through a case officer manager, director, and director general on the board of directors, where the whole process is scrutinized by all this line of analysis. And then the final decision that we make, based on the case-by-case analysis, approved by Director General, and the final decision questioned by a board of directors, will now determine whether we have a substantive case or the case collapses. And in addition, also, where a case has not passed the test of competition analysis that we are carrying out, parties have a way of progressing that particular case to competition tribunal. And what I can say is that for the cases that we have ruled on and gone to the tribunal, in most cases, the tribunal has ruled in our favor. That shows there's no interference, or our analysis is actually robust to be tested by all these parties in the market.
That's interesting, which makes me wonder now, when you look at the direct foreign investors, sometimes when they want to come to a country, of course, they have to look at the parameters of control, matters of competition, and other regulators that are in play. Is having a strong authority good for direct foreign investment? Does it safeguard the local market? Or it might do that, but does it also scare away the foreign investors if perhaps sometimes you're found to be very stringent? That balance is an equilibrium that is tricky for, I think, for any nation across the world to capture, because it's a moving target.
Yes.
So how do we balance the two vis-a-vis? You also need jobs to be created by these, in investment companies. That equilibrium, how do you seek and strive to achieve it? And which is the best practicing standard in other countries that we could borrow from?
Thank you for that question. One thing that I should mention is that competition regulation or competition enforcement is not about the parties. Here we are talking about foreigners and locals and Kenyans, and it's not about the parties. It's about the competition itself. And therefore, what we look into is investment, that foreign direct investment in this case will be bringing capital. And how do we attract? The way we attract this is through mergers that I've earlier alluded to. That merger analysis, we don't look at who is investing.
So you look at the impact.
We look at the competition market itself. And in most cases, foreign direct investment, there are two options. One, they will be acquiring companies that already exist, bringing more capital, or they'll be bringing new capital. And the way we do that is to have a very strict timeline in terms of how we analyze mergers. That we create a situation where that any merger that is brought to us, as long as all the information required for competition analysis with us should not go beyond 60 days. And in most cases, what we have done is to even do that in less than 40 days. The Constitution, the law provides for 60 days, but we have been able to do that within less than 40 days. So by doing that, by fast-tracking mergers as authority, we actually create an environment that attracts investment, predictability in our decisions, and therefore contribute to the ease of doing business in our economy. And we also do that not only in Kenya, but also working with regional competition authorities, because there are cases where companies which are in the region are being bought or acquired by companies from outside. So in that case, those mergers where substantial part of that market share is outside Kenya, then we work with regional competition authorities. And we have regularized our regulations such that we can work in harmony and also ensure that there's no double notification. One party will take notification, we analyze our component of the market and give our submission to what is the effect of that particular merger in our context and submit to the regional competition authority. So by doing that, having a very predictable approach to our merger analysis, we contribute to ease of doing business and attract, therefore, foreign investment.
Okay, so from the report, some of the things that you allude to, obviously, then is some money loops or money holes in terms of where perhaps money has gone where it shouldn't. What is that about?
Money in terms of
So, in
settlement?
terms of how money has been spent, or in terms of how money has been allocated, you seem to have had some issues in the report as per how this exactly took place. And if I quote some of the things that you said within this report is. Just very quickly here, in terms of the trail of money, the question that the report then tends to raise is that there are concerns about budget and staffing. What steps are being taken to address this?
All right. Thank you. I think it's now clearer. What there is that the numbers, employees of the authority, is an important indicator for how effective we are in terms of enforcement. Based on the structure of the authority that was created during the creation of the Competition Act, the numbers have not grown because we fall within the bigger scheme of government in terms of employment, recruitment, and as advised by other government agencies. So that is the number they are speaking to. The other aspect is what we do as an authority. We have reached out to other regions through regular visits, informing about competition. We do see in competition, one of the most important aspects is compliance. For us to have a good compliance, entities need to know what competition is all about so that they are expected to comply. And when they're on the fault, then they have good understanding of what is happening. So here we are talking about financial resources and also human resources that I think has been work in progress. The authority has amended its law and also brought on more staff over the years. And this is progressively being implemented as we speak. So one of the key elements that OECD have identified is, given the current structure and the number of years of the existence of the authority, moving forward, we need to still increase our resources for enforcement and also for market studies that we do to support our evidence, and also a number of officers who are employed within the authority. And I think this is a recommendation that we can take forward as one of the improvement areas that they have identified in the report.
And some quarters argue Kenya is yet to take off as an industrial hub. We are largely an import, economy, and therefore perhaps we might not be ready for competition control. What would you say to that?
I think based on the report we have seen and some of the key findings, and there's competition is generally more of a principle across the globe. The report has seen that in principle, our law supports that and is comprehensive enough for us to do that. What is happening, what you might be more relevant from our perspective to your question, is that we have bigger SMEs, small and medium enterprises, that fall below the threshold for even merger analysis and competition. That could be the dimension we can look at in terms of our market, but there are bigger players in the region and also in Kenya, with also substantive capital outlay in East Africa Community or COMESA region. And therefore, for those competitors who might be few but have substantive market share, although they are not the aggregated, small SMEs might, have more capital than them. There's need for us to look at what is their behavior or conduct in the market for us to analyze based on competition principles. So based on that, in my view, is that yes, there are a number of companies, number of entities which qualify to be in that space. And we also need to recognize how can we promote our SMEs. And that's actually one of the mandates that we have, that whenever there's a relationship between big suppliers and buyers, then that also needs to be enforced. And that's one of the mandates of the authority in what we refer to as the buyer power, particularly looking at the retailers and the suppliers, the many suppliers that supply them. So this is more of not competition per se, but looking at the relationship between retailers, the supermarkets, and the suppliers, their suppliers, and what sort of terms exist among them. So this is not directly competition as such, but it's a form of enforcement that allows us to encourage growth of our SMEs so that they graduate into bigger capital outlay.
Some of the things that also jump out in terms of this report that has come out is, so when you see, what are rather the overall priorities when it comes to responding to the peer review recommendations? There are recommendations that have been made as a result of this review. What are some of the things that come out as a result of that? And what should Kenyans expect to see?
Yes, there are a number of good recommendations that came out of that report based on the analysis of the status of competition framework. One of them is looking at how we can improve our merger analysis. The recommendation is vigorous economic analysis to inform that process. That is one of the key take that we will going to look forward into. The other one is market studies. They are saying that given the status and the years of existence of the authority, we need to do more market studies to inform. And they have seen that on average, comparable jurisdictions have had 3 market studies per year. Ours is slightly more than 1, but then we need to do more in terms of how market studies can inform our policy reforms moving forward. The other aspect I've seen is that even though we have more market analysis that has been done and market studies have been done, then in addition, we need to prioritize more enforcement. More enforcement in the sense that we need to reach out to the market and see where are the concentrations, where are few players, and where are more conducts which are not competitive. There are more. There could be indication, given the number of enforcement we have done, there could be more anti-competitive behavior in the market when we don't focus on that, and that's come out very clearly as one area as a priority for us moving forward that we need to look into. The other aspect is looking at our internal structure in terms of the budget you mentioned.
As an authority now?
As an authority.
Okay.
It will be as a nation also, because we are a national regulator. Whatever we do within those sectors will have implication for the wider economy. So in aggregate, if we look at all sectors and then we play a role of more effective enforcement or more market studies in those sectors, or even vigorous merger analysis, collectively then it will affect our economy. And that's what we are looking at. But for us, given the nature of our market definition, all our analysis is based on market definition. We look at a sector and say if it's a paint, if it's telecom, or if it's steel. Those are how we look at specific sectors in terms of what are the conducts, what are the behaviors of the players, and how many players are in those market segment. Are they behaving according to what competition laws empowers us to look into? So looking at all this in more broad sense, looking at merger analysis, looking at more market studies, looking at more enforcement, in the long run will contribute to bigger economic growth and provide more employment opportunity. Even foreign direct investment you mentioned earlier will be part of that component. The other thing which came out very clearly is in terms of cooperation with other sector regulators, including public procurement, where government spent about 60% of our expenditure on procurement. How can we work with sector regulators to ensure that there's no bid rigging that does not create value for money for government in terms of procurement laws? So these are the areas they have identified. We need to expand our reach and improve our operations more strongly. Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
those gaps will clearly help to iron out some of the unfair competition that exists, because bid rigging is real. I mean, to be fair, and you see it affects the end product. So the consumers also get the backhand of it all. But beyond that, there are sectors where monopoly prevails. You could talk about the telecoms, you know, like even here in Kenya, without mentioning the companies. Also, you look at the energy sector. Monopoly is highly rampant. How then do we as a nation unlock that? Because that also would have a potential for a huge market. The competition, if it were to be allowed, it might improve efficiency and value for money, as you rightly put it, both for the nation and for the consumer.
Right.
How do we address the monopolistic tendency that seems to be protected in one way or the other by the powers that be?
Yeah, thank you. I think this question also relates to a previous report by World Bank with regard to market competitiveness in our economy. The starting point for creation of more state agencies at the beginning was because of more consideration on public interest, that the benefit that these companies bring on board to the economy outweigh competition issues or any other considerations. Those were the genesis for creating state-owned enterprises, the ones that you have highlighted in those sectors. Then I think that particular report of World Bank indicate that we need to look at more issues where how can we analyze, or how can we, moving forward, look at some of the critical sectors and create more competition in those markets. I think this goes back to now the bigger picture of what was the rationale for creating these companies and how are they performing. One of the economic justification for creation of state-owned agencies, more importantly, is to remove bureaucracies in decision-making and make them more efficient. We do understand there are certain sectors which are critical, and the government has to play a role. If we let the government not play a role, then we don't know the outcome of that process. We need to be very conscious in terms of what will be the likely effect of those companies. But as an authority, a competition authority, we don't regulate government reforms or government agenda, because government has a much broader public consideration issues as opposed to macro sector issues that we look at into. So this is within the government decision to see what are those sectors where still there's need to regulate or reforms by themselves, and what are those sectors that they can let go in terms of competition enforcement and deliver better services to citizens. So there are those issues that we need to be alive to, that government, given that broader public interest consideration, would outweigh competition issues within those sectors, then it still has a role in those sectors. But in recent now, we have also seen that there is certain companies which have been reformed, like for the sugar sector, for example. So I think it's work in progress, in my view, that as we grow as an economy, as we grow even our competition space, as we even expand our enforcement, then we are, I think, gradually, without overhauling a system overnight, we are getting there in terms of how we can reform certain sectors. And the government, I think, has already taken some initiative in doing that.
Kenyans have a lot to say about the reforms in the sugar sector and the revamping of the companies. But I think that's a story for another day. Just wondering how you, as an authority, perhaps offered an advisory or not regarding the sale of the two major companies, because so we spoke of the state agencies. So now we have the Safaricom, we have the KPC, and Kenyans have a lot of opinion. Either they understand or they do not, but they do have an opinion because they feel these are major sectors that needs to be either owned by the government largely, controlled, regulated, and the people need also to have a stake in it. What's your advisory to that? Because that in own by itself might in one way or the other tilt the competition factor. We don't know how, but that uncertainty is what makes Kenyans feel like we may not be moving in the right direction. What's your advisory to that?
Yes, I think that's in public domain. It's a very vibrant debate. And we have to look at it from competition perspective. The telecom sector issue you mentioned is more on shares. It's not change of any role they play. And also what we have seen in the past, even within that sector, beside the shares itself and operation of the company itself, is from a competition perspective, becoming a big company for any sector is not a competition issue, because it allows companies to be creative, innovative, and more efficient in producing different products and doing research to see what will be most strategic decision they can undertake. Having said that, what is important for competition is if a big company abuses its dominance or its position in the market. So from a competition perspective, that's what we focus on. You are big, yes. Are there any conducts or any strategies you are employing to undermine or kill smaller companies. That's what we look into. And maybe I can give an example of what we have done just to illustrate my point. Is you remember some time back there was agents across the country. At that time, the dominant player in telecom sector restricted their agents, their own agents, not to deal with other competitors' agents, customers, sorry. So what they did was, if there is an agent of this particular company close by to a consumer, they could not access because there was certain restriction that was put on them by the telephone companies. But what we realized was that there was no investment that was put into this agent by this particular company, and therefore there's no need to exclude other other telephone operators to have a cash
point.
A point for customers to have access. By doing that, then they will increase access to these services by consumers. And we came in and we opened up and intervened in the market and said, this is anti-competitive in terms of limiting both competitors as well as limiting access for customers or consumers. So we opened up, and therefore if you go to any of the agents today, you can find different telephone companies having their desk or point of service to consumers. So that's how being a dominant is not anti-competitive. But if you abuse that position, then we come in and intervene in that market.
Have you ever had to intervene in such a case?
We have, yes, in the mobile agents across the country. And actually we opened up that, the opening up of given agents where you can have telephone companies having their desk or point of service for consumers is actually, we did unlock that restriction.
And how do you determine that this goes on? Do you wait for complaints? Do you see what the market does? How do you determine that there is an issue of unfair competition taking place with agents, for example?
Yeah, there are different ways of looking at it. One is we do have our own intelligence. Media is a very important area for us to look into. That whatever is reported, as in far as different sectors of the economy, we review and see, is this isolated case or is across? If it's an isolated case, it's difficult to intervene because it's just one case out of many. Then in that case, we don't intervene. But if we see a case like that, we follow up and do what we call desktop study first before we go into the market. Once we establish this actually widespread, then we intervene. So we do our own market intelligence for using media as one of the areas of source of information. The other aspects also complaints, as you correctly mentioned, that individuals come and complain, give us information, and then we expand that complaint. How widespread is it in our economy? And once we also establish that, then we also go follow and look at that particular sector and also further our investigation. Because it's a complaint, then we take it up, do more analysis, investigate, do reports out of that, and then we see that there's a concern in this market. And many of the cases we have seen is that individuals who complain, they also repeated complaints are very important for us to signal that this is not an isolated case, but most of the cases are relevant for us to look into. Yeah.
Well, brand cannibalization is another way of big companies remaining active in the market. But I also realized a subtle way of them swallowing the startups, because they'll start what you'd call an inferior brand to compete against their own superior brand vis-a-vis, but what they're targeting is those startups that are coming up, which is unfair competition in terms of marketing. But again, for them as business entities, they reserve the right to exploit any existing market dynamic for them to prevail, because they're in business to make profit. It's not charity, it's not humanitarian aid. So you look at that and then you wonder, also you want to reserve space, like you said, for the SMEs, for them to thrive properly, for them to access capital, for them to assume the market. But currently Kenya is struggling we've heard of many companies leaving the country because of unpredictable tax regime, of course, unfair competition, because when you have a lot of imports coming into the country and you're doing local production, then the pricing, the variation also affects your market share. All these dynamics, as you try to look into competition, how do we balance? Because we need imports to an extent, but we need to also promote local production. You want the big companies to remain in play because of employment and also stability of the market. You also want the startups to rise, and grow and contribute into the economy. Where do we draw the line that this is healthy competition, but beyond this is exploitation? And where have you encountered exploitative tendencies?
Exploitative tendency is one of the areas that we cover in competition. And there are instances where we have seen manufacturers refusing to deal with the local farms. So those are the instances we have some time back we looked into, where they call it refusal to deal, that you refuse to sell your products to a specific retailer, for example. In terms of threshold for competition, and therefore they need to not go beyond certain limit within a given market segment, what we look at is how big are these companies, what is their market share. And that's what we use as an instrument when we are analyzing that within a given structure of a market, say banking sector, for example, which is very vibrant in our economy with more than 30 companies, commercial banks in existence. Then we look at how big is this company and what are some of the practices that prevail in this segment of the market, and therefore what are they doing to make more profit. So in terms of market behavior, we do look into given market segment, what is the market share, and are there any conducts that are undermining competition in that space for that matter. So we looked at analysis of market competition in that sense, but there's no fixed threshold where you say this is now the limit within which we cannot allow big companies to grow. But market share is a very good indicator in terms of if you are substantially more than 50% or 70% of the market share, you are basically dominant. And what is your behavior in the market? Are you setting prices, or are you excluding others from exclusionary conduct, or are you exploiting consumers through high prices? So those are the issues we look into in terms of ensuring that big companies don't kill. And what you have said actually exists, even in the European Union. They call it killer acquisitions. And what we are seeing lately is the acquisition of companies, of small data companies, where they see data moving forward as a very important component of their market segment. So they do that. But the challenge we have at the moment, and also within EU and more competition in space more broadly, is the value for data. What value do we place on data? That does not exist as of now. We are really working together with other regional competition authorities and also globally, where we sit on international competition network and participate in their forums. Is there isn't fixed value for data as such, but we are seeing in the last 5 years or so, big companies acquiring small data companies, and there has to be to do with the data becoming a, so to speak, gold of some sort moving forward. And as you know very well, data is going to be very important in terms of digitization and also seeing consumer behavior and also artificial intelligence. How can you analyze your market and even compare behavior of consumers using data as a very important instrument? But we are aware of this fact that killer acquisition is something that exists. And also if you look at fintech, big companies in the past, it was actually approved. Many acquisitions were approved, and that's how they grow. And that's why we have these big companies today, even in globally, that have huge market share in specific sectors. And we are aware of the big techs of today, and that's how they grew.
Okay. How can you ensure, or what are the methods that will then be used for operationalization of this report and not just, another talk shop like we've seen before?
Yeah, this is a very important point in terms of there are a lot of reports that are generated on an annual basis. And given that this is a voluntary request, we are the ones who asked for it, to provide basis for us to reform our competition landscape in Kenya and in the region. And also given this a very independent assessment of our framework, we do see a lot of value as justification for us to do reforms. For any, coming from a research background, providing justification, having evidence for any reform will be the starting point for any reform that we see. Now, coming back to your question then on that account, is that we would like to retreat back now internally because we have seen external assessment of our report. Now it's time for us to look at internally what are some of the areas of improvement that have been highlighted by this report. We look at priority areas because it's not going to be feasible, to be realistic, that we are going to reform all things within a very short time. We'll see what are priorities for us, what are the immediate reforms that we can do, that's within our mandate, and we can do it within a very short time. We are going to prioritize and rank and make a roadmap out of what we have received as a report and see what are those reforms that will require immediate reform, that will require just our own effort. What are those recommendations or improvement areas that require medium term, and what are the long term? We are going to spread out what has been proposed or recommended and see how best can we implement most of these things. The support we have from our parent ministry is very strong. They were in attendance of the forums.
Which is your parent
Which is the parent ministry, yeah.
The National Treasury.
Okay.
National Treasury. And they are the policy holders of what we do. And therefore, policy reform of this nature will require their support as well. So we are going to make a roadmap of recommendations that were made and reach out to them, and in collaboration with the parent ministry and other development partners, we are going to see how best we are going to implement these proposals in the coming years.
In the coming years, even?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's moving forward, as I've said. The range of recommendations that were made is going to be immediate reforms that we can do, medium term, and also long term. And this is what I mean as in the coming years.
In the coming years.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What can Kenyans look forward to? And I guess this is kind of in line in terms of implementation and operationalization. But what can Kenyans look forward to? Folks getting into the market, for example, who think, okay, are there protectionist policies for me who may be a small starter against the big boys who may be already operating? What can they look forward to essentially safeguard some of these, I guess, investments that they put in?
What they should expect to see is more enforcement actions in terms of looking deeper and wider into the markets across the country. Following these reforms, when we talk of enforcement, we look at different sectors of our economy. What are the status? What are some of the areas that we need to look into? How can we make the market more competitive, provide enabling environment for small companies to grow using their strategies and grow their capital and enter any given market that they have. One of the things that we have done in the past was to look into the tea sector, for example, where the regulation did not allow individual farmers to grow different type of tea. What they were doing was given the members of a given miller within a given region were approving any entry into that sector. So we came in and unlocked that restriction and provided more evidence for them to grow that sector. So what we'll expect in short will be more enforcement actions and also more efficient merger approvals and also alignment of our cooperation framework with regional and also continental now.
Right.
We do have ACFTA, African Continental Free Trade Area, where we now need to align our laws in the region and also in the continent level to ensure that there is competition not only in Kenya, because the point is that Kenya is not isolated. Our businesses are across the region. How can we make it more efficient?
Sure.
So that products that come from within the region, given the integration dimension of competition and also other trade practices, then we need to see more effort in terms of competition and more benefit for consumers and also flow of goods and services. So through this competition, effective enforcement, we'll be able to see these and better prices and relatively better prices for consumers and also more efficient market for Kenyans.
Times to look forward to, and thank you for sharing a lot of this with us this morning. Come to the top of the hour. Dr. Dano Wario is the Director, Planning, Policy and Research at the Competition Authority of Kenya. Thank you for joining us this morning. And thank you, everybody, for starting off the week in the Situation Room with us and getting into more conversations as the week continues. Have a good rest of the day. Good morning.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.